this is like a really exciting moment for me. Anab is one of my heroes, and I'm so excited to hear her talk today. You might have followed her incredible writing, her projects, her TED Talk. All of these things are available to you, so have a look later on today. I'm just going to introduce Anab before I hand over to what I already know is going to be a beautiful presentation. So Anab's going to talk to us today about calling for a more than human politics. Anab's from an organisation that she founded called Superflux, and Superflux creates world stories and tools that provoke and inspire us to engage with the precarity of a rapidly changing world. Superflux was founded by Anab Jain. The studio has gained critical acclaim for producing work that navigates the entangled wilderness of our technological, political and cultural landscape. It's continually exploring the hinterlands of this new normal and surveying the complex forms emerging on the horizon of our near future. Anab, for me, is one of the thinkers and doers of our generation. Her mind always takes me in places that I've not ever been before. So I'm really looking forward to this talk on Anab's recent writing around calling for a more than human politics. Thank you so much for joining us today, Anab. I'm going to turn my camera off for a little while and let you wow us with your talk, and we'll come back later for some questions. If you're in Hopin right now, please ask your questions in the chat, and we'll make sure we get some questions to Anab at the end. But for now, sit back and enjoy. Thanks so much, Anab, for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Imi, and everyone in your team for hosting this incredible event. It's really an honor to be here. I'm going to start by saying Black Lives Matter, and I'm really hopeful for big structural change that we are starting to see. Okay, and with that, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so can everybody see the screen? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm assuming you can. I'm going to. This is a talk I gave actually last year, and he invited me to share it with you. And it somehow, even though it was pre-COVID and pre what we've seen in the last few weeks, I somehow feel it's perhaps even more relevant. So. I'm going to start by sharing this painting of the revolt or the mutiny of 1857, as my Indian history books would say. 150 years ago, these things were so unheard of that you could simply have a revolt and then call it the revolt. So what happened? Well, basically it was 1857 and the British were rapidly colonizing India. On 29th March, a soldier called Mangal Pandey decided to question some of the things in his particular regiment, and but that was not acceptable. So he and two other Indian soldiers were arrested and hung. But the unrest had spread thanks to Mangal Pandey, and it's really supposed to be the moment when India's kind of fight for independence against the British colonial power began. Of course, this is just one of the many histories we are told. For instance, my friends here in Britain are not aware of this, and I have only heard about the glorious British Raj. It of course took 90 years of lots of millions of people to come together to fight for what they call independence, and then there was India and Pakistan both got independence. Our colonial histories, as we are all beginning to learn now, are dark and murky, but what seems clear is it takes years of belief and rebellion and constant hope held by millions of people that leads to this moment of freedom. Revolutions are slow, revolutions are dark, but revolutions are also hope and also help shape futures. I've started with colonial histories because I think a lot about futures, because there are no futures without histories. Whilst mine was overwhelmingly dominated by a very clear revolution with a very specific enemy who had to be defeated, today, if we look around us, the enemy is far more torturous and indiscernible and faceless. we are all fighting in our own ways around things we believe in, but it is really hard to just point a finger at one person or one thing. Of course, there are a few who I could quite easily sucker punch, but that's another story. And also at the same time, if you look at listen to 97% of the scientists, we know that there's an undeniable urgency to change things quickly, and it is this urgency that I want to talk about today, about urgency for a different kind of politics, the politics of hope, critical activism, and fungal revolts that we need to address, that will help us address some of the complex challenges we face. So what does this mean? I'm going to take you through a journey of a short film we made for the V&A Museum's exhibition called The Future Starts Here. And in this film, we attempted to map the complex technological and sort of ecological infrastructures that have been built around the simple device, our smartphones. From our faces being mined by invisible agents to mechanical Turks, undersea cable networks, Bitcoin mining, server farms, factories, and terraformed rare earth mineral sites, our journey in this film revealed in parts the sheer scale of our entangled technological and ecological networks. It's quite a long film. I'm not going to kind of play all of it today, but you can find it on our website. But it was a real kind of epic exploration of how deeply interconnected and entangled the tools we are creating are, and how there just isn't a simple solution or a quick fix to some of the challenges we face. It was through this journey that we also realized that the tools we are creating to master the world are remastering us. But more importantly, it became evident that the desire for mapping, tweaking, and ultimately controlling deep, complex systems is hubristic. Today, the constructs that form our understanding of the world are being continually outpaced by the sheer force of technological, political, and social change. Modernism's methodologies for mapping, designing, planning, and controlling such deeply complex systems may not be the answer to the challenges we face. Maybe we need to go underground, working in networked symbiotic companionships like mycelial net arrangements to generate infinite micro-revolutions. Ecologist and scholar Tim Morton attempted to make sense of such entanglements by coining the term hyperobjects. According to him, we have created things that we can hardly understand, let alone control, let alone make sensible political decisions about. A new word to understand how mind-blowing it is hyperobjects. Hyperobjects are phenomena like radioactive materials and global warming. Hyperobjects stretch our ideas of time and space because they far outlast human timescales, or they are massively distributed in terrestrial space and are so unavailable to immediate experience. Our practice, which I co-founded with John Ardern, Superflux, is a place and a space for us to explore some of these complexities and how we might navigate them. By bringing these naughty worlds, these complex naughty worlds into the present, into the here and the now, our hope is that we are able to help people engage emotionally with some of the complex challenges we face, but also to understand the vast potential of the future. One of the most recent and ambitious projects that we've done till date is a project called Mitigation of Shock, where we wanted to condense this vast amorphous form of climate change hyperobject into something recognizable, tangible, and understandable. It all started with this familiar graph from NASA, which is a global land ocean temperature index. But beyond the single vector of temperature rise, there are many more complex problems that this graph does not kind of highlight. And secondly, we don't see ourselves in this graph. For instance, current projections suggest that by 2050, per capita food consumption will grow from 32 kilos today to 52 kilos, along with increased volatility in price and production. However, we find that most people in their lives are not really able to make sense of that information. So, based on such projections, we explored one possible future where the Western world has moved from abundance to scarcity. We imagine living in a future city with repeated flooding, periods with almost no food in supermarkets, economic instabilities, broken supply chains, which you could kind of replace for the virus. What can we do to not just survive, but prosper in such a world? And more importantly, what food would we eat? To really get inside these questions, we started doing a ton of live prototyping. We began to imagine that a lot of our homes will need to become spaces for food production. And so we started building computers from scratch. But we were also interested in building them in the cheapest way possible, from salvaged, abandoned, and repurposed materials, turning today's waste into tomorrow's dinner. John and my colleagues at Superflux had never built a food computer before, but so in practical terms, it meant really engaging with the materiality of these challenges, constantly trying to forage, build, improvise tools and materials, heat sinks, an app to check the soil's health, which is hardly glamorous, forage pallets, thriving tomato plants. I just absolutely got completely drawn to the suspended root ecologies and watching mushrooms bloom. So we also had locusts for a bit, but then things started getting real, and kind of took over the studio. And this is John trying to test a phonic system where we were just using nutrient fog, no food, water or soil to grow things quickly. And this is a few years ago, where we were trying to imagine what that would feel like to live with our son, who was then 5. And then this is the final kind of form of this project, took the form of an apartment set around 2050 or so, when our son might be around kind of my age. As you enter the apartment, you find familiar things that are signs of material abundance, but then on closer inspection, the realization that the apartment has been modified to a world it was not meant to inhabit. So evidences like newspapers and radio shows start reflecting this new reality. There is a smart panel which is asking the fridge to refill milk, but where is this milk? Where is the milk in this future? Recipe books and methods for growing and foraging food reflect the changes in growing, consumption, and consuming food. As you turn around the corner of this apartment, it gets less and less familiar. You start to see microcontrollers, plumbing supplies, fog makers, snares, all of these contraptions constantly growing and producing food inside the apartment, and kind of purple fog oozing out of these contraptions, mycelium beginning to bloom, chili plants, and we even had spirulina and algae, and all of them starting to find a new life in the blasted ruins of capitalism. Looking beyond, you see a city familiar yet alien. And for us, what was important was that hundreds of thousands of people went and spent time in the apartment and were able to confront some of their fears, but were also able to see hope, because they were able to see that there are tools and methods and things we can start doing to change how we live and how we might confront some of the biggest challenges of food production and climate change. And I think that's the power of this kind of a speculative approach with hands-on experimentation, that it gives people the chance to not just kind of consider this at a kind of in a rational way, but have an embodied visceral sense of what that would mean. And most importantly, this work is not a one-off. We created a second version of this apartment set in Singapore, which is currently being shown at the Art Science Museum. In this instance, we started to move away from technological-based food growing system to be inspired more by permaculture, looking at soil health and companion species and companionship within the species indoors. So a kind of adapting principles of circular farming, reuse of waste, to create this kind of an indoor agricultural system. This is some of our early prototypes. Again, I can't stress enough the importance of making sure that alongside thinking and exploring systems of change or futures, how important it is to get hands-on and understand the materiality and the structures of such systems in a very material way. These are just some of the images from the installation. We also started meticulously handcrafting tools. John really got into it, gathering, capturing, snaring, consuming food in different ways. He actually, and Ed, my colleague, John and Ed, made these what we call Arduino spheres, which were made from the discarded Arduino circuits from the previous installation, along with whittled bamboo and plastic grind from discarded plastic bottles. So in a sense, repurposed electronics, mechanical and plastic remains, all this waste of the Anthropocene now finds a new ritualistic purpose. And looking outside, you can see a very different, very humid and wet Singapore, whilst extreme weather and economic uncertainty have changed the world as we know it in this future. It is the sheer ingenuity of the inhabitants, their tools, their artifacts, plants, and new ways of living, all here to tell a hopeful story of extreme adaptation taken to prosper in one possible post-climate change future. And the question is, why is it important to create such a detailed level of visceral or embodied form of experimentation and scene setting? The thing is, with global warming, the current political landscape feels extremely polarized. It is either denial that global warming actually exists, led by the one who shall not be named, or complete apocalypse, aka the end of the world. And as we sway between doom and denial, we are stuck in what Lauren Berlant calls a state of impasse, a moment where existing social imaginaries and practices no longer produce the outcomes they once did. But no new imaginaries or practices have yet been created. Philosopher Isabel Stengers writes about such a state of impasse that it's being actively produced by managers of the status quo, or the guardians, and that these guardians work actively to produce a situation where it becomes impossible to imagine anything other than the status quo. And Stengers continues to say that when choices are presented by guardians, they are infernal alternatives, a series of non-choices presented as choices. So the choice between doing nothing about climate change or geoengineering, like solar engineering, or the choice to do nothing about deforestation, or the choice to trade forests as commodities in order to preserve their value. This production of two bad alternatives, two bad choices where one is less bad than the other, is a means by which the guardians make problems inaccessible to anyone but themselves. And so a cold panic and an impotent fear of the future sets in, functionally demobilizing people. So our question has always been, how do we resist the pull of such a, the gravitational pull of such an impasse, and imagine deflect these forces of power? How do we imagine different worlds within our current political landscape? With our practice and projects like mitigation of shock, we want to write stories of extreme adaptation emerging in precarity and thriving in what was left of the ruins of what we call capitalism. It may be the end of the world as we know it, but other worlds are possible. And it's all well and good, create alternate experiential futures. It sounds great, and it's actually quite an uphill battle. We have worked with so many organizations who really want to very quickly package these futures into into neat solutions and roadmaps, and that's overwhelmingly strong. But more than that, we have learned that it's very difficult for people to not jump to conclusions. There's a tendency to see that this particular instantiation of the future presented in front of you as the future, and therefore a prediction to be complete, or to be completely dismissive as it doesn't align with the ideological worldviews. The possibility of sitting with the discomfort of uncertainty and being open to multiple views of the future or of multiple views of the world is difficult. And that's because our prospective brains are not trained to maintain multiple worldviews simultaneously, while simultaneously being told by a lot of seductive media of which vision we should follow. So yeah, being open to uncertainty, I would say, is not to be taken lightly, or it's not a motivational quote. It's certainly not a meme, but it's actually a rigorous and quite exhausting practice that requires holding multiple possible worldviews simultaneously and being able to see connections between these possibilities and not retreating from the egg. And there are many instruments apart from modeling and scenario planning and evidence-based work that can help us do that. And these instruments, some of the instruments we use are narrative and myth making and fiction and storytelling and cautionary tales, poetry. Yeah, it is endless, the tools that can help us imagine and hold possibilities. And I kind of feel that this cone or the horizon, this future that we are marching towards, possible, plausible future, whatever it is being challenged. And so, this kind of infinite, if you kind of make sure that cone is crossed out, then infinite possibilities open up within our world of finite resources and finite time. So what will we do? So what can we, kind of imagine and do differently? One view that I find very endearing is around post-anthropocentrism. Many scholars and farmers and philosophers and gardeners and all sorts of people have been working on this for a very long time. My friend and multi-species scholar Anne Galloway asks, what if we deny that human beings are exceptional? Or what if we stop speaking and listening only to ourselves? So this really has, has kind of been something that I've been thinking about, and we have been thinking about in the studio for a while now. And it kind of was it triggered off also because of the mushrooms that we were trying to grow. It's not an easy thing to grow mushrooms, but anyway, I was completely captivated, and these beautiful forms that I was holding in front of me came after a lot of trial and error. Actually, when we set up our kind of original experiments in this kind of DIY fog-clad chamber, with the ultrasonic sensor and all that, nothing happened. For a long time, nothing happened. We moved them around, and actually it was these disturbances, both human and non-human disturbances, both and also planned and unplanned, that actually created the optimum conditions for the mushrooms to start to grow into these beautiful and quite delicious forms. And yeah, I kind of felt that this kind of staying with the materiality of it, staying with the unknown and exploring and watching and noticing, this gave birth to new relationships for us as we moved from just making things to making things that grow. Of course, foresters grow trees and farmers grow wheat, but within our world of design, the focus on the perfect outcome or the product or the artifact is so strong that it became it kind of inhibits us from thinking about the process and the organism and the things that we are shaping and nurturing. By suspending pots with in basins of nutrient fog, we saw how roots were born, how they were formed and grew into these delicate ecologies, how they transformed and died or continued to grow incessantly. It was a slow form of epiphany, and it drew me into a world of many interacting species. It provided a very useful vantage point of knowing ourselves as participants in a more complex human and non-human world. Um, in Staying with the Trouble, Making Kin in the Thylacine, Donna Haraway also offers such a perspective that favors de-emphasizing human exceptionalism in favor for multi-speciesism. And what I've understood from staying with the trouble is being open to the possibility space. If you can move beyond quick fixes, we become open to the strange and the unknown, and the ambiguous and the uncertain, the weird and the provisional. And then there is so much kind of angst around that space of the possibility space, but also really quite thrilling. In his book, Richard Powers also talks about these kind of multi-species relationships within forests, that, there are no individuals in a forest, no separable events. The bird and the branch it sits on are joined things. A third or more of the food of a big tree may go to feed other organisms. Even different kinds of trees form partnerships. Cut down a birch and a nearby Douglas fir may suffer. This is a great Occupy Wall Street. That I just love this image from Donna Haraway's book that I had to include, the more than human species and their phylogenic justice. What this has helped me to think about is that by seeing something, that this kind of commitment as a practitioner means that thinking about myself within being human in a more than human world means that you start to become more considerate of other people and the viewpoints. That attacking somebody having different views is it the same as attacking yourself for feeling differently about something on a different day, or realizing that stripping an ecosystem, the natural resource that everyone depends on, is tantamount to cutting a piece of your own flesh in order to feed yourself. We are a collective body of many parts, in and out. And this kind of has helped me to kind of form the starting of what I'm calling a tentacular, multi-kind, multi-species politics of care. By seeing the self not as an individual hero, but one among many, human and non-human, a new kind of tentacular, multi-kind, multi-species politics of care might emerge. A politics which does not rely on oppositional, binary, artificially constructed worldviews, one that is not obfuscated by the right or the left or the neoliberals or the communists or whatever it is you choose to follow. A politics that gives us a new kind of relational agency to help us imagine alternatives for living with and through global warming. A politics which gives us an opportunity to invent new practices of care. Humility, imagination, interdependence, resistance, revolt, repair, and mourning. This is just my quick attempt at a more than human manifesto of sorts. It's the start of an A to B list that moves from human to more than human politics, from systems to assemblages, from nodes to knots, as Anna Singh says, or from extinction to precarity, where we understand life as precarious means that social existence itself depends on interdependency through the care of others, or being vulnerable to others and putting unpredictable encounters at the center of things. From innovation, which is about infinite progress or growth, to resurgence around restoring and regeneration. From global to terrestrial, from producing to engendering. And of course, the term Anthropocene as a human-induced state of the planet. And to move away from that to what Kim Stanley Robinson says is dithering, which is a state of indecisive agitation, seems more suited for where we are today. I kind of want to say that this is urgent and that this is not a time to kind of isolate and get even more fractured and fragmented. It's a time where we have to we cannot live under the illusion of isolation, and we can either embrace this new understanding and work with this implication, or face the consequences of our ignorance and inaction. I want to conclude with a call to arms, to explore and understand the limits of anthropocentric capitalism, to embrace the burden of a world that is increasingly complex and challenging, to actually really think about the deep resourcefulness we have, about our own strengths and imagination, a call to stay with the trouble and keep the revolt alive. Thank you.
Hey, everybody in the audience. I'm just going to give you a moment to take that in. And that was incredible. And I just want to say to everyone in the audience, please share any questions. From what I could see on Twitter and in the chat, people are mesmerized. So I'm going to let you sit with that for a second before you ask your questions. And thank you so much for sharing with us. Ever since I've come across your work, I've been just completely mind blown. But absolutely, the More Than Human Politics is such an important frame, and the manifesto has really got us thinking a lot about the everyday choices, the language, the things that we're thinking about, and how we move beyond sort of human exceptionalism. And I wanted to kind of ask you a few questions about that as we follow on. We've got about 15-20 minutes, I think, and then that will take us back up to the hour when we started late. So you talk about this visceral embodiment and scene setting that we need to do. I saw an example of it recently, and I was taken aback by it being on a TV show and watching 50 years in the future, and somebody had actually put this into a television show. And I remember how it was just a Netflix series, and it was season 5 or 6 of it, called The Affair. It was just a very, like, I was just watching it to kind of, forget about everything and just watch something that was completely mindless. And then suddenly in season 5, they'd created like this apartment like the one you showed, and I was like completely changed by it, because it basically talked about our children being about 30 or 40, my sort of age, and this is the world they might sit in. Mm-hmm. So on that theme of like viscerally embodying and children, and when you brought up, how old your children might be and I think that was one of your children in the picture. What does this mean for education? What does this mean for what we need to be talking with our children about, what experiences we need to be creating? And, I always have these fanciful ideas in my head that maybe in your household, you guys are like constantly living this, and your children are completely like engulfed in it. How much do you talk to them honestly? How much are you helping them to learn? And what are your sort of bigger ideas about what this means for education, and what we need to be doing urgently over the next few years to really lean into that final slide of being playful, embracing this, and trying to create more experiences? But yeah, I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit more, because I've followed you for years, and I'm always wondering, I wonder what it's like in their house. What do they talk about?
Chaos. It's absolutely like, I have only one son, and we are quite careful, John and I, to draw a line somewhere, because if you think a lot about the future, you're also very anxious, and we have to be careful to not influence his own the way he will take in things, and he should be able to do that and form his own opinions, and but I think in terms of education, of course, it's something that we still educating our children for a future that they will never find themselves in. So this 20th century, by and large, 20th century education model has to give way for a less siloed, more collaborative, more open education. But it's easier said than done. I think I feel like we are retracting even further back in terms of the curriculum, some of the requirements that we put on our children. So I actually feel very strongly that there is so much we can do, simply by allowing children to not reward them just for the right answers, but also for asking questions, for being able to say, I don't know, but could it be this, for being able, how can, we don't ask enough questions as adults, and that's because we've always been trained to answer the question rather than ask the question. So yeah.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that. And yeah, it's really interesting to hear you talk about when you sit in the future, or you think a lot about the future, that can create a lot of anxiety, and so that you moderate that to make sure that your own son's journey as an example is one of learning and discovery, and not just anxiety. And before we go on to the questions from the audience, how do you deal with that as a person? So, your work is constantly sat in the future. There's a lot of things right now that are creating this a scale of anxiety and fear. And how do you? And I know you won't have all the answers, but how do you deal with living and creating these visceral experiences that you are feeling an embodied experience of the future? And how do you deal with that? And I've just seen that question has also come in from Meg Lightark. So how do you deal with the emotional side of looking into the future, the ache, the anxiety, the overwhelm? So Meg, we must have been thinking exactly the same thing. But yeah, Anab, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, not very well, not very well at all. There are a lot of people, one thing to say is that everything when we think about different possible futures, it is always about bringing them into the present. So it's always about having a different lens to think about our present and how that could be different, or what decisions we can make differently in order to kind of arrive at a different future. So it's in a way a lens to reflect on our present. And it's not easy. It's a lot of people have asked us, oh, you must have thought about this crisis, or are you better prepared for the pandemic? And we're like, no, we're not. Like, I have relatives and I have family and I have elderly parents in India whom I cannot go and see. There is no way, just because I can kind of have trained myself to hold these multiple possible views in my view. It does not mean that in fact, I don't know whether there's a word for this, where if you have the second order of knowing the consequences, does it make it? I think it makes it worse. Not knowing is better. And so I think we are just constantly kind of finding, I must say that I'm very, very, in general, I also see a lot of optimism and hope, so I kind of hold on to that. And I do think that things will get a lot worse in the near future, the way we're going. If in terms of just 1.5 degrees as a Paris Agreement is a complete myth. Even if we were to stop all emissions today, it would take and not release any emissions for 10 years. We will still end up in a 3 to 4 degrees most likely. So really, that is not a great world to be in, and that's just simply the fact. So I think we have to find ways through it. And I genuinely believe that people who say, I don't want to think about it, or it's too much, or just talk to me about positive things, that's burying your head in the sand and not really rising up to I think we need to really embrace this panic and really work through it, because otherwise we will be stuck in this. Yeah.
Thank you for talking to that honestly. When we start to wrap up, I will certainly talk to you more about where you are seeing hope, or the things that make you feel that we can do something about this. But I appreciate the honesty, because that idea of, it's not easy to deal with this. It's not something that you have superpowers just because you embody this work. And I think it's really important for so many of the people, and we've got lots and lots of people watching, and this will be recorded so people can follow up for those who have get care and other work responsibilities right now. It's so important for people to hear that, you know, people who are doing this futures embodied work are not superhuman, that can just, you know, deal with it. We all still have lots of other interdependencies, children and parents and grief and loss and household and bills and all of those things to pay. So so I appreciate that, and I really like what you said about the second order effects, because I agree. I don't know the language for it, but I've been very lucky in the last 10 years to have proximity to people like you and a few other people doing your sort of work, and that is a theme that I've come across multiple times, that actually there is a second order impact on the lives of people who can see what's coming, and, you know, constantly, you know, walk down the street every day, and every conversation they're in almost feels like a simulation of, yeah, but that's not the future we're working towards, and we can't, you know. And so I've seen that a lot, and so I appreciate you sharing that. I'm going to go to a couple of questions from the audience now, and then we will you know, start to talk about where you see hope and where you see some of that More Than Human Politics manifesto starting to play out, or what you would like people to do with it, right? You had a call to action at the end, which we'll leave again on the slide when we finish. But let's go to some questions from the audience first. So we've got a question from Sarah Flynn. She asks, I wonder in a practical sense how we integrate the issue of uncertainty into design frameworks when they are so much about testing and evaluating results. As I see it, there are limits to knowledge. There is always that which humans cannot know. Do design frameworks need to evolve to acknowledge this?
Yes, that would be a simple answer. Yes. Design has a history of being very closely tied to solutionism, and I think that we are reaching a point where we are realizing that there aren't, for some things, there aren't easy solutions. And I think there are a few things to do, is to reflect on oneself, one's own position within the organization, and then to be aware of the fact that in such a moment of unmeasurable uncertainty, that there is no data being back to us. So we have to think creatively, and we have to be able to imagine multiple possibilities. And even if you're going to run with one, we should be able to have those other threads open and be able to move between them, which is what most systems work would require one to do. I think it's kind of designers can look at complexity science, designers can look at systems theory, designers can look at a lot of these other fields, and most importantly, they can use their power of imagination to really start thinking not just of the things they are designing and testing and evaluating, but the intended and unintended consequences of those things once they are left out in the world. We will never have the full picture, but what would that make us do differently?
And I hope that starts to answer a question that came, which says, I don't know who it's from, sorry, but it says, curious to know how you personally reconcile another world is possible with an Indigenous worldview of one world with many, many possibilities. And I wonder if you want to extend, or if you think you've already kind of answered that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very, I just want to say I'm very inspired by some of the work of Indigenous communities. I'm very, very careful of not using that label, because I just don't want to be disrespectful. I don't want to be in this position where, because we are fucked, looking at those communities who held on to some really important core values and trying to market that into a solution. So I'm just really cautious of that.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, Anab. And for those of you who were in the talk before, we heard from Angie Tangeri about from an Indigenous community in New Zealand, about how some of the core Indigenous values went into the work that they were doing. So you can follow up with that. And if you are even more interested in that, we've got a talk from Diana Rusin later this week, an Indigenous leader in Canada, working on the Winnipeg Boldness Project. So yeah, thank you. Really appreciate that, Anna, in terms of not co-opting or trying to label the work, but being incredibly inspired by it. And yeah, we hope to centre some of those voices this week. And as I said in the previous talk, I'm incredibly inspired, in fact, in awe at some of the things that have happened in New Zealand. So yeah, thank you for the question, and please follow some of the other talks for answers to those questions directly from people for whom that is their centered experience or community. So we've got a question from Kat Drew, and I know you might know Kat, she's from the Design Council, I believe, but she said that she's really interested in the anxiety piece that we talked about. Confronting fear can spark need for change, but anxiety can stifle the ability to hope. Could you maybe say something about how speculative design projects create conversations, both around installations, but also maybe in neighbourhoods or elsewhere, so that people and maybe non-people can help each other stitch together the hopeful bits? So I think that's maybe also, I've been looking at that question for a few minutes. It's probably linked to a question I was going to ask, which is, we work at a community sort of neighbourhood level. What are the things that we could do to create those conversations, and maybe, like Kat says, something about the role of speculative design projects and how people can start to stitch together some of the hopeful bits. What are your thoughts on that?
It's complex. I think it's not, there is no, I don't know. I really don't know what would be the right thing to do. I think it requires a lot of experimentation. I think it requires an openness to experimentation with the openness that you won't find out and you may fail and you may not figure things out. So I think that's really important as a caveat to put in the beginning. I mean, it has taken a pandemic for us to start thinking about some deep structural change. And I only hope it doesn't take another one for some bigger change to happen. And that's what I'm trying to get at with the thing, that if why do we have to reach this point of crisis for us to understand that actually the real people who really help hold the society together, the key workers, are the ones who are least paid and who have the worst employment rights. Like, why, what I'm trying to get at it is, we panicked, we reached an absolute state of fear, then started growing food in the house and in and around the house, that, oh shit, now I cannot rely on supply chains. And that's the thing. I think many times, and there is a lot of research that shows that people often are pushed to that point of fear and anxiety in order to change. I'm not necessarily advocating that that's the only way to do it, and there are other ways to do it, but we need to understand that this is, if there's a fire outside the window, closing the window and saying we are all right is not the solution. But it is very, very difficult for people to see that fire, especially when it's an invisible virus or anything of that kind. So I think that's where I'm talking about the power of imagination, or speculative design, or experiential design, or critical, whatever you call it. Other tools and instruments that can help surface these potential challenges in a way that data and evidence-based instruments that we use today may not be able to. So I think then whether you use it within communities, within neighborhoods, between human and non-humans, is how you shape that experiment.
Thank you, Anab. Paul, I hope some of the things that Anab has said is start to answer that question, because we won't have time to go into that one because it's quite long, but I think the answer that Anab gave around experimentation and just love Anab's honesty about, like, we don't, like, she's not an expert on knowing exactly what's going to happen, right, and give us all the answers, but through experimentation, through acknowledging where we are, being honest with it, and bringing that honesty, that we can start to think about how that then leads to community action or influencing policy change. I like this last question. So before we start to wrap up, I just want to speak to it because I don't know whether you have any thoughts on this. I have a few as well. But Marwa has asked, how can we imagine and create futures in a multiplicity of languages that can effectively reflect the complexity of worldviews?
Absolutely. I mean, good question, very good question. I think, does she mean multiplicity of language as in spoken language, or is it the word or the verbal form of communication versus the non-verbal, or folklore? Because I can see that. I think that if you talk about multiplicity of ways in which communities explore different worldviews, there is so much rich evidence of that already in our history, in our folklore, in poetry, in children's storybooks, where other worlds and other views and other ways of seeing the world have been really beautifully explored. So, and when it comes to language, again, like my own, I grew up with a lot of kind of Hindu kind of mythology, and that was very rich with multi-layered worlds with humans and non-humans and superhumans and monsters. So there is, I think, more important is at what point do we stop doing that? Wherever, in whichever language or whichever part of the world, when do we stop exploring and imagining and fantasizing and start getting all, give me the answer, let me get into the next thing, this box is ticked, how can I finish that outcome, what is my next quarterly return, where are my profits? At what point? That's the shift we need to be able to decouple speculative financial markets from our communities of care and welfare.
I was just going to say thank you so much, Anab. Marwa talks about spoken languages as well, and I think I probably will just add to that whilst I probably don't have a fully formed answer on this, one of the things I've definitely seen in my generation of diaspora Punjabis all over the world who have really been reclaiming language. There's a wonderful poet in Birmingham who is doing so much of her work through the medium of Punjabi now, and relearning it and learning the multiple ways in which you can understand things. And I know this to be true of lots of other communities, but as Anab said, I don't really want to talk on behalf of that. In the last call, you'll see from Angie and Penny and all my work and connection with them, that they center the land, the communities that they are part of, the land in which they're on, the languages which form that. And I think we could do a whole talk together, couldn't we, on the impact of colonization on language, on English, on centering the human exception. It's all really linked. And there's if you're from Birmingham, there's a great project called Slanguages, which starts to look at language and the way it plays out in poetry. But there's probably hundreds of projects like this. So I feel like I could talk to you all day. And I want to say thank you for your time, because I know even just from following you and knowing how absolutely absurd and crazy lockdown has been for you and for many other families. So appreciate the time. The presentation was exquisite in terms of your putting together of different ideas, and I know I can see from social media and all the messages coming in how much people are thinking, and we'll go back to the video to really think about some of those concepts more deeply. So I want us to just start to close up by talking about the more than human politics, and to say that it sparked so much in me to imagine certain things in different ways. And I want to kind of end on not a toxic positivity at all, just more where are you seeing hope, those moments of hope that keep you going in all the unknown, and that sort of second order of effects of kind of seeing where we're going. What are you holding on to? What's giving you hope? What might be your call to arms to the audience? You already had that on your last slide, so we could bring that back up. But yeah, could you maybe wrap up with that, please?
Sure. I think the Haraway's asks to stay with the trouble is actually really hopeful in some situations, that if we are able to move past quick fixes and short-termism, then that's really a very hopeful sign that we will make some really critical decisions with the long term in view. I'm very hopeful of visions around reparation and reparation ecology. I'm very hopeful of every mutual aid group that has emerged from COVID-19, including my own little group of neighbors who are ready to do shopping runs for each other. I'm very hopeful of the kind of relentless desire for people to help and care for each other in times of crisis. There's truly a lot of hopeful things that we've seen in the last few months, and I think if we can kind of make sure our politicians, that's even possible, are able to, or we are able to find the right ones. So how can we embed this vision of care and community and hope into our policy and into our politics? I would kind of say I would leave it at that. But thank you so much for having me. So truly an honor.
And on that note, I just want to say a huge thank you to Anab Jain. You can follow her on Twitter as Anab Jain. You can see her TED Talk, and most importantly, the More Than Human Politics Manifesto is beautiful. I'd print it out and stick it on your wall and start to think about those shifts that you're talking about. And on that note, I think Anab wants to say something, which is perfect, because we can leave her with the final word.
I might send you something to stick on your wall.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, that would be lovely. And yeah, I think if we can find a way to get that up onto the walls of hundreds of people, thousands of people all up and down the country, maybe that's something we can do, right? Share that manifesto, that kind of just little shifts in going from, for example, innovation to resurgence, these shifts in our mind, share it with someone, print it out, stick it on your wall, and whatever I get from Anab, I'll make sure I see if we can do something wonderful with it. So thank you, Anab, and I'll leave you with that slide. We're just going to stop talking and go off the screen now, and see you later on the stage for more talks, and head over to the expo if you want to go to the workshop with Rachel Caldecott. Thank you.